On July 30, 2025, President Donald Trump shocked the world by slapping a sweeping 25% tariff on all Indian imports, effective immediately. The announcement came without warning, sending shockwaves through global markets and leaving both American and Indian businesses scrambling to assess the fallout. For months, trade negotiators from both countries had been working behind closed doors, hoping to reach a breakthrough. But with a single signature, Trump upended years of diplomatic progress and set the stage for a new era of confrontation. This move, rooted in his America First doctrine, shattered hopes for a US-India trade deal and signaled deepening tensions between the two democracies. The abrupt escalation caught Indian officials off guard, as they had believed a compromise was still possible. Instead, the relationship between Washington and New Delhi entered its most uncertain phase in decades, with trust eroding on both sides. The White House cited India's protectionist policies, high tariffs, and close ties with Russia as justification, framing the action as both economic and geopolitical pressure. Officials argued that India's reluctance to open its markets and its ongoing defense deals with Moscow left the US with no choice but to act decisively. The administration insisted that the tariffs were necessary to protect American jobs and send a clear message about the costs of defying US interests. Trump warned of further penalties, making it clear the tariffs were a tool to force India to realign with US interests. In a series of fiery speeches and social media posts, he accused India of taking advantage of the US for too long and vowed to keep raising the stakes unless New Delhi changed course. The message was unmistakable. The US expected India to choose sides in an increasingly divided world. For India, the sudden tariffs threatened key export industries and millions of jobs, plunging the government into crisis mode. Indian officials convened emergency meetings to assess the damage, while business leaders warned of layoffs and factory closures. The textile, automotive, and pharmaceutical sectors, pillars of India's export economy, faced immediate uncertainty, and the livelihoods of countless workers hung in the balance. The world watched as India faced a direct challenge from its most important trading partner, with global markets bracing for impact. Investors feared a wider trade war, and analysts speculated about the long-term consequences for the global economy. As the dust settled, one thing was clear: Trump's gamble on India had set off a chain reaction that would reshape the future of international trade and diplomacy. The tariffs marked the dramatic end of months of failed US-India trade talks in 2025. Despite early optimism and Indian offers to lower tariffs on American goods and buy US oil and fighter jets, negotiations broke down over agriculture. The US demanded access to India's protected dairy and farm markets, an absolute red line for New Delhi. Haunted by memories of massive farmer protests, Indian leaders refused to risk political backlash by opening these sectors, while US negotiators, pressured by their own farm lobby, wouldn't budge. This deadlock proved insurmountable, dooming the talks and paving the way for Trump's punitive tariffs. The collapse exposed the deep clash between American commercial interests and Indian political realities. The US is India's largest export market, making the tariffs especially painful. In 2024, bilateral trade hit $130 billion, but the US ran a $45.7 billion deficit, fuel for Trump's claims of unfairness. India's exports to the US are diverse: electronics, pharmaceuticals, jewelry, garments, and petrochemicals. These sectors are the backbone of India's economic modernization and Make in India push. The sudden 25% tariff put Indian companies at a steep disadvantage, forcing them to either absorb losses or risk losing market share. The disruption threatened both economies, upending a vital trade relationship overnight. For Indian exporters, the US market went from opportunity to crisis in a single announcement. The India tariffs were part of Trump's wider protectionist campaign in 2025. Using Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, the administration imposed or increased tariffs on steel, aluminum, cars, copper, timber, and more. Citing national security, steel and aluminum tariffs doubled to 50%, and new duties hit finished goods and automotive imports, rattling global supply chains. The administration also launched investigations into aircraft, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals, keeping businesses worldwide on edge. Trump's aggressive approach upended decades of trade norms, forcing countries to rethink their economic strategies. India was just one front in a global tariff war aimed at realigning trade on American terms. The message was clear: no sector or country was safe from US economic pressure. India's pharmaceutical industry, often called the pharmacy of the world, is the globe's largest supplier of generic drugs and a critical player in the international medicine market. When a trade standoff erupted, India's pharma sector found itself at the very heart of the conflict, wielding influence far beyond its borders. The United States depends on India for a staggering 80% of its generic medicines, as well as about a third of the active pharmaceutical ingredients that go into countless, essential drugs. These affordable medicines fill American pharmacy shelves and keep healthcare costs in check for millions of patients. When tariffs were threatened, it wasn't just a matter of economics. There were real fears of drug shortages, empty pharmacy shelves, and soaring prices for life-saving treatments in the US. Hospitals and patients alike braced for potential disruptions to their vital supply of medicines. In response, Indian pharmaceutical companies quickly pivoted, ramping up exports to Europe, Africa, and Latin America. By diversifying their markets, they reduced their dependence on the US and demonstrated their agility in the face of global uncertainty. This strategic shift exposed just how vulnerable the US was to disruptions in its medicine supply, giving India a subtle but significant advantage in ongoing trade negotiations. The crisis made it clear that the healthcare systems of both countries are deeply interconnected, with lives on both sides of the world depending on this complex supply chain. As pressure mounted in Washington from hospitals, patients, and the powerful healthcare lobby, India's pharmaceutical strength emerged as a powerful bargaining chip, one that could not be ignored. What was meant as a punishment instead highlighted India's indispensable role in global health, cementing its status as a linchpin in the world's medicine supply chain. The US-India trade conflict unfolded as global companies sought to diversify supply chains away from China. India, with its young workforce and growing market, positioned itself as the top alternative. The tariffs ironically made India even more attractive for long-term investment as firms sought stability beyond US politics. The government rolled out incentives and cut red tape, luring global manufacturers, especially in electronics. Even as India relied on China for some materials, the crisis spurred a national push for self-reliance in key sectors like pharmaceuticals. The result? India's role in global supply chains grew stronger, not weaker. The tariffs catalyzed India's journey toward manufacturing independence and resilience. What was meant as punishment became a springboard for India's economic ambitions. The trade dispute was as much about geopolitics as economics. Beneath the surface of tariffs and trade balances, a deeper contest for influence was unfolding on the world stage. The United States, long accustomed to setting the rules of global commerce, now faced a rising India determined to chart its own course. Trump's tariffs were partly a response to India's increasingly independent foreign policy, especially its leadership role in BRICS and its deepening strategic partnership with Russia. Washington viewed these moves with suspicion, seeing them as a challenge to American dominance in global affairs. India's growing oil imports from Russia frustrated Washington, which sought to isolate Moscow after the Ukraine crisis. Yet, for India, energy security and affordable oil were non-negotiable priorities, even if it meant defying US pressure. Indian policymakers argued that their nation's development needs could not be held hostage to shifting geopolitical winds. They saw diversification of energy sources as essential for national growth and stability. The US further provoked India by striking a major energy deal with Pakistan, India's historic rival, deepening mistrust and fueling suspicions about Washington's intentions in South Asia. These moves pushed US-India relations to their lowest point in decades, reinforcing India's commitment to strategic autonomy and its refusal to be drawn into any one camp. Instead of drawing India closer, US pressure drove it to strengthen ties with other powers and regional blocs, including China and Russia, and to assert its own vision for a multipolar world. The attempt to use economic coercion backfired, as India refused to compromise its core interests. Indian businesses and policymakers rallied together, determined to withstand external pressure and protect national sovereignty. The tariffs became a symbol of a deeper geopolitical rift, one that would shape the future of US-India relations and the balance of power in the 21st century. India's response to the tariff shock was calm and strategic. The government protected farmers and small businesses, turning its refusal to open agriculture into a point of national pride. Diplomacy remained open, but India aggressively diversified exports, forging new ties with Europe, Africa, and Southeast Asia. The crisis accelerated India's rise as the premier alternative to China in global supply chains. Trump's tariffs, intended to coerce, instead fueled India's economic and strategic evolution. The US faced higher prices and supply disruptions, while India emerged more resilient and influential. The 2025 tariff crisis became a turning point. India absorbed a superpower's blow and came out stronger. The world took notice. India was now central to the global economy's future.